Moving into a new home can be a thrilling experience, and for me, that excitement reached new heights when I found myself in a charming neighborhood governed by a homeowners association (HOA). Nestled among picturesque houses with manicured lawns, vibrant gardens, and friendly faces, it felt like I had stepped into a postcard. The promise of community living was enticing. Potlucks, seasonal gatherings, and the chance to make lifelong friends filled my imagination. As I unpacked boxes and settled into my new space, I envisioned creating my own little oasis in the backyard. Gardening had always been my passion, an escape where I could connect with nature and express my creativity. I dreamed of transforming my modest plot into a colorful sanctuary filled with blooming flowers and fragrant herbs. The thought of nurturing plants while contributing to the neighborhood's beauty filled me with joy. I envisioned weekend mornings spent tending to my garden, sharing tips with neighbors who admired the blossoms peeking over my fence. Little did I know that this excitement would soon clash with the very community spirit I had embraced. Just as my seedlings began to sprout, so did unexpected challenges from the HOA's regulations on landscaping within the community. Unbeknownst to me, these restrictions would lead me down a path fraught with tension and surprises, starting with an ominous letter that would change everything about my newfound life in this vibrant community. Fueled by my passion for gardening, I set out to create a small paradise in my backyard, envisioning a space that would not only beautify my home but also serve as a personal retreat. I imagined winding pathways bordered by bursts of color, an inviting mix of perennials and annuals designed to bloom at staggered intervals throughout the seasons. Daisies, marigolds, and lavender danced through my mind, their vibrant hues promising joy and tranquility. To give the garden depth, I planned a tiered layout, using weathered stones to form raised beds that would allow the plants to thrive while adding visual interest. Each section was to be carefully curated, blending herbs and flowers that complemented each other in both fragrance and aesthetic. I pictured rosemary nestled alongside bright yellow sunflowers while creeping thyme spilled over the edges of the stone beds. Gardening had always been more to me than just digging in the dirt. It was a way to connect with nature and reflect my personality. My grandmother had passed down her love for plants to me, and every bloom reminded me of her nurturing spirit. As I prepared the soil, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose and nostalgia, imagining how proud she would be of this little oasis. But just as I was ready to immerse myself in this fulfilling endeavor, doubt began to creep in with that ominous HOA letter. Would my dreams of cultivating this botanical haven survive the constraints of community regulation? Little did I know that this budding project would soon challenge not just my gardening skills but my understanding of community itself. The day after I received the HOA letter, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I read through its content. The message was formal yet ominous, outlining several alleged violations regarding my garden. The HOA claimed that my plant choices were inappropriate for the community's aesthetic, and that the layout of my raised beds exceeded the allowed height specification. To my dismay, they had even noted that my plants encroached on the common space, a detail I was certain hadn't been true. As I scanned the letter, I felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. The complaints were vague and seemed to stem from a neighbor's discontent rather than any clear violation of the rules. It became evident that some residents of the HOA were deeply invested in maintaining a particular image for the neighborhood, one that didn't seem to include the organic charm I was trying to create. Accompanying the list of grievances was an alarming mention of potential fines, a hefty penalty for each day I failed to comply with their demands. My heart raced at the thought of paying for simply trying to cultivate beauty and personal expression in my own backyard. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just about plants. It felt like an attack on my identity and passion. Determined to defend my garden, I knew I had to take action. This situation demanded not only a response, but also an understanding of the very regulations that could impact my vision. Would my love for gardening survive this bureaucratic challenge? Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, I received the dreaded fine from the HOA. The letter arrived like an unwelcome guest, bearing an official seal that felt far too severe for my modest gardening efforts. As I read through it, my heart sank. I was being charged not just for alleged violations, but for the very act of nurturing life in my own backyard. A fine for what? For growing a few flowers and herbs that brought me joy? The initial shock morphed into a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of helplessness washed over me. How could a community that prided itself on beauty turn against someone trying to contribute to it? It felt like a betrayal, as if my neighbors had banded together to stifle not only my garden but my spirit. Each word in that letter felt like a weight pressing down on me, challenging the authenticity of my passion. I spent hours mulling over my options, grappling with the notion that my small slice of paradise could lead to financial penalties. Would I pay for something so personal and meaningful? The thought was unbearable. In that moment, it became clear this was more than just about plants or regulations. This was about asserting my right to express myself within the confines of this seemingly rigid community. Determined not to back down, I resolved to fight back. Not just for my garden, but for every gardener who had ever faced similar challenges. As I delved deeper into the HOA's rules and regulations, I found myself navigating a complex web of community standards that seemed to prioritize uniformity over creativity. The guidelines were extensive, detailing acceptable plant types, garden sizes, and even aesthetic considerations like color schemes. It became clear that the association aimed to maintain a specific image for the neighborhood, one that valued conformity above personal expression. While some aspects of their guidelines made sense, such as ensuring that gardens did not become overgrown or unruly, I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. My tiny garden was not just a collection of flowers, it was an extension of my identity, a canvas where I could express my love for nature and creativity. The restrictions felt suffocating, stifling the very essence of what gardening meant to me. I began to question whether community standards should overshadow individual expression. Wasn't gardening meant to be a personal journey? Each plant had its own story, and every choice reflected a part of who I was. In this battle between community aesthetics and personal passion, I felt caught in the crossfire. I started to think about ways to advocate for a more flexible approach, perhaps proposing community meetings or workshops where residents could share their gardening experiences and ideas. As tensions rose, it became evident that this struggle was not just mine alone. It resonated with others who yearned for a balance between adhering to community guidelines and celebrating their unique gardening style. This wasn't merely about plants anymore. It was about fostering a community that embraced diversity in all its forms. As I digested the weight of the HOA's regulations and my personal battle with them, a surprising revelation emerged. I owned a stake in the local nursery. The realization struck me like lightning, illuminating a connection I had almost forgotten. Years ago, when I was still navigating my career path, my grandparents had bequeathed this modest nursery to me as part of their estate. They had cultivated it for decades, nurturing not only plants but a legacy of community involvement and love for gardening. At first, the nursery was just a business venture, an opportunity to explore horticulture professionally while honoring my family's roots. But over time, it became much more than that. It was a sanctuary where gardeners gathered to exchange tips, ideas, and plants. I felt the pulse of creativity in that space and learned about nurturing not just plants but relationships within the community. Suddenly, I recognized how this connection could empower me in my current struggle against the HOA. My experience owning a nursery offered insights into best practices for landscaping and community engagement, a perspective that could bridge the gap between individual expression and communal standard. Armed with this newfound understanding, I felt invigorated to advocate for both my garden and others like it. This dual identity as both a gardener and business owner positioned me uniquely in the conversation about gardening aesthetics within our neighborhood. Perhaps now was the time to leverage my influence positively, to foster dialogue between community members and encourage acceptance of diverse gardening styles while keeping everyone's passions blooming together. As I stood in my small garden, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment, I felt a deep sense of investment in both local gardening and the broader ecosystem. Each plant I nurtured represented not just a commitment to beautifying my space, but also a dedication to preserving the environment around me. Gardening had always been a personal endeavor for me, a way to connect with nature and foster life, yet now I found myself grappling with the contrasting realities of commercial gardening through the nursery. In the nursery, I focused on scaling operations, maximizing profits, and meeting consumer demands. While these aspects were essential for business sustainability, they sometimes overshadowed the creative joy of gardening that I cherished at home. At my backyard plot, I reveled in the freedom to plant what resonated with me personally, heirloom tomatoes inherited from my grandmother, and fragrant lavender that reminded me of sun-drenched summers spent in her garden. This juxtaposition highlighted a broader conversation about the relationship between individual passions and commercial endeavors. Can we strike a balance between the two? I began to envision how my experiences could inform practices at the nursery, promoting sustainable choices while celebrating personal expression in gardening. By incorporating educational workshops on ecology and diverse planting styles, I could inspire community members to embrace both beauty and environmental stewardship. Gardening was more than just a hobby or business for me. It was a way to cultivate connections among individuals passionate about nurturing life, whether for personal satisfaction or as part of a larger commercial vision. This newfound clarity fueled my resolve to advocate for a gardening ethos that harmoniously blended personal creativity with ecological responsibility. With a renewed sense of purpose, I began to formulate strategies for addressing the HOA and advocating for my garden, as well as that of others in the community. First and foremost, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, armed with research on gardening rights and examples of communities that successfully embrace diverse gardening style. Speaking directly to fellow residents and board members would allow me to share my passion and educate them on the importance of personal expression in gardening. Utilizing my connections within the nursery, I planned to organize a small workshop that would focus on understanding local regulations while also encouraging creativity. This workshop could serve as a platform to gather like-minded neighbors who felt similarly stifled by the HOA's restriction. Together, we could brainstorm ideas on how to present a united front when addressing the board, emphasizing that our gardens could enhance the neighborhood's charm rather than detract from it. Additionally, I envisioned creating an informational pamphlet that would clarify gardening rights and best practices under HOA regulation. Distributing this among my neighbors could empower them to advocate for their gardens and provide insights into appealing to the HOA for more flexible guidelines. I realized that fostering an open dialogue with the community was crucial in this venture. By educating residents about their rights and the positive impact of diverse gardening on our ecosystem, I hope to cultivate not just plants, but also a supportive network of gardeners ready to stand up for their passion. In doing so, I aim to inspire change from within, ensuring our neighborhood could thrive as a vibrant tapestry of personal expression and ecological responsibility. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and with it a blend of nervousness and excitement coursed through me. Armed with my research and the support of fellow gardeners, I stepped into the room, ready to engage with the board members I had so often dreaded. As the meeting commenced, I watched as other residents voiced their concerns, but my heart raced at the thought of presenting my case for more inclusive gardening standards. When it was my turn to speak, I focused on the community benefits of green spaces. I highlighted research showing that gardens improve property values, enhance neighborhood appeal, and foster social interactions among residents. With each point, I framed our gardens as vital assets, rather than mere decorative elements, subject to strict uniformity. The board listened attentively, but skepticism lingered in their expressions, especially regarding potential deviations from established guidelines. I then shared personal stories, my grandmother's heirloom tomatoes and fragrant lavender that held memories of family gathering. By connecting gardening to emotional richness and personal expression, I aimed to humanize the issue. This wasn't merely about aesthetics. It was about cultivating a community spirit that valued individuality alongside beauty. The discussions evolved into negotiations around potential garden standards that would incorporate flexibility while maintaining some uniformity. We proposed pilot programs for community gardens where residents could experiment with diverse styles under HOA supervision. The response from some board members was cautiously optimistic. Perhaps there was room for compromise after all. As I left the meeting feeling empowered, I knew this conversation was only beginning, and it marked a crucial step toward reshaping how our community viewed gardening, fostering a more inclusive environment for all plant lovers. Inspired by the positive momentum from the HOA meeting, I began to envision a community garden initiative that would unite neighbors through shared gardening interests and foster a sense of togetherness. The idea sparked excitement among fellow residents who had attended the meeting and expressed their desire for more opportunities to connect over gardening. We gathered at my backyard to brainstorm possibilities, transforming frustration into creativity. I proposed a cooperative space where everyone could contribute, whether through planting, maintaining, or simply enjoying the fruits of our labor. This space would feature designated plots for individual gardeners, while also including communal areas for growing seasonal vegetables and flowers. The idea was to create not just a garden, but a hub of activity where skills could be shared, friendships could blossom, and knowledge about sustainable practices could be exchanged. To promote buy-in from the neighborhood, I organized an informal gathering at the local nursery, encouraging residents to come together and discuss this initiative openly. We envisioned regular workshops led by both experienced gardeners and novices eager to learn, creating a vibrant calendar of events that would draw participation throughout the season. As we finalized plans for the community garden proposal to present to the HOA board, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The initiative would not only enhance our environment, but also empower residents to advocate for their gardening rights collectively. Together, we aim to cultivate more than just plants. We sought to nurture relationships and build a community that embraced diversity in all forms, a true testament to what can grow when neighbors unite around common passion. As the community garden initiative began to take shape, I noticed a significant shift in my relationship with both the HOA and my fellow residents. At first, the HOA had seemed like a restrictive entity, impeding my personal expression through gardening. However, as discussions about gardens broadened, it became clear that many board members were genuinely interested in exploring new ideas. The joint efforts to elevate our gardening practices fostered an unexpected camaraderie. Residents who had once hesitated to voice their gardening desires now approached me with enthusiasm, eager to contribute their thoughts and experience. We shared stories not only of our individual gardens, but also of our hopes for a sustainable, collective future. Many had previously felt disheartened by the strict regulations. However, through our community meetings and collaborative brainstorming, they began to see that unified voices could yield tangible results. At one point, a board member who had been particularly skeptical joined one of our workshops, intrigued by the community engagement and the positive energy surrounding our discussion. As she engaged with participants, observing firsthand the sense of connection and education taking place, I could almost see her perspective shifting. The narrative was evolving from rules imposed by the HOA to a shared vision where gardens enhanced community life. This transformation reached beyond just gardening. It symbolized a larger shift toward understanding and embracing differences. I became increasingly aware that cultivating relationships was as crucial as cultivating plants. Our journey together demonstrated that when neighbors unite around a common passion, not only do gardens grow, but community spirit flourishes too. Reflecting on this journey, I realize how much I have grown through the conflicts we faced together, both with the HOA and within our community. Initially, I felt isolated and discouraged, struggling against regulations that stifled my passion for gardening. However, what began as a personal battle transformed into a collective effort that not only strengthened my resolve, but also fostered a sense of unity among neighbors. Navigating the complexities of community living taught me the importance of advocacy and dialogue. By standing up for my gardening passions while respecting the shared values of our neighborhood, I discovered that it is possible to create a harmonious balance between individual expression and community standards. This experience emphasized the power of collaboration. When we unite around common interests, we can inspire change and create spaces where everyone feels valued. I encourage anyone facing similar challenges to embrace their gardening dreams while engaging respectfully with their communities. Use your voice to advocate for your passions, but also be open to understanding the perspectives of others. Together, we can cultivate not just beautiful gardens, but thriving ecosystems of connection and support. As I look around at our blossoming community garden, I am reminded that growth happens in many forms, not just in the plants we nurture, but in the relationships we build and the conversations we spark. Let this be a call to action. Whether it's through gardening or any other passion, let's continue to work together, champion individuality, and enrich our shared living spaces. After all, when we cultivate understanding and cooperation, we truly allow our communities to flourish.